Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak. Big data and the citizen. I think one of the conclusions of my talk will be that this is about, this is about the citizen. Lots of our talks have been about data, but the emphasis here is on the citizen, but the data is critically important to this. I want to start by introducing an idea which runs right through this talk. And it's the notion of knowledge infrastructure. I like this idea. It's a term that's used perhaps in the social science area, but it can refer to anything. This meeting is knowledge infrastructure. A university library is infrastructure. A website is knowledge infrastructure. And I like the term because it's neutral about whether we're talking about people or about technology. And that's one of the themes of this talk as well. This is all profoundly about both of those things. And my question to you, through introducing the notion of knowledge infrastructure, is to make you think about what's the knowledge infrastructure for a city. So just to say a few things about knowledge infrastructure, it's something clearly that's very, very different today to how we might have thought about it in the past. And it's something that's very fluid, as we've heard in the talks. It's something that is, as I've just said, fundamentally socio-technical. And I don't want to give a talk that's emphasizing technology impact on society. This is very much the talk which is, if you like, the other way around. I will finish by being very citizen-centric. I think also a very important point is that we can do old things in new ways, but also we can do entirely new things with the affordances of digital technology, with the affordances of big data. And also, of course, that there's no single universal solution to this that will last for all time, but there has to be a continuous conversation around what the appropriate infrastructure is. And that conversation itself is something that's part of that knowledge infrastructure. And meetings like this are very much about that. So that sort of sets the scene for this talk. My second picture to set the scene is a picture that I'm quite famous for using. I seem to use it in all my talks. So if anyone's heard me speak before, you've seen this before. It's a simple picture, but really useful. So on the vertical axis, this is about the increasing availability of technology. This is Moore's law, if you like. It's faster computers, it's more cores, it's more processor, it's more storage. Those curves are published by the technology industry. So we know in advance exactly how that axis plays out. The horizontal axis is really interesting. It's the increasing engagement of people, by whom I mean the citizens as well as the scholars and everyone, with the digital world. A less well predicted axis, but very significant in terms of the increasing engagement with digital. This will vary from country to country. You know exactly how it is in Singapore, and it's a very significant engagement. And I think we've seen that sort of bottom left quadrant is sort of where computer science lives and sort of traditional technology. There's been a big push, certainly in academia, through movements over the last 10 years or so, in the use of the new computational capacity, high-performance computing, supercomputing, the new scientific computation that we can do that's really affected high-end research, and quite a lot of investment there. But very significantly also the increasing engagement of citizens. From my point of view, working in a university, even with the research process, but this picture applies not just to university research, it applies to society in general. The really interesting place is that top right quadrant, which for us today is big data and the citizen. Now, if anyone wants to reuse this slide, all you do is take the title of your talk and you put it in the top right quadrant. Okay. Because it will always work, because everything is happening in the top right quadrant. Actually, not everything. Some things I'm very happy to have on the bottom left. Air traffic control, I don't want that done on Twitter yet, okay? But the top right is absolutely the quadrant in which we're discussing things today. I'm going to talk about that quadrant. A discussion we could have later on might be what happens next, because you can argue that the vertical axis continues, and eventually, when all citizens are engaged, you sort of run out of people, but the technology keeps going. So it looks like we have a future which is really very much more about automation. And if we want to look further ahead, 2020, 2050, maybe we should be talking much more about the automation agenda. But my focus now is very much that top right quadrant, which is fundamentally, very much about people and about society. Sometimes in that quadrant it feels like the computers are slaved to the people, and sometimes it feels the other way around, and I'll say something about that. What I'm not going to talk about in great detail, but I wanted to make this distinction early on, is this sort of deconflating what often gets conflated between big data, open data, and personal data. And you can have some fun trying to put those things onto the previous picture if you want to try. And the intersections are important: big and personal, big and open, open personal. The one in the middle is big, open, and personal. I'll let you try and think of examples of that. This is actually a slide from the Open Data Institute, which Brian mentioned just now in the UK. A lot of conflation of those terms, and quite important to tease them apart. And I will, especially with my social science context, be quite focused on personal data in this talk. Just a little bit now about what's going on in the UK, and then I'm going to come back to some reflections on this, and also I'm going to come back to some response to one or two of the things that have come up in discussions yesterday and today. So this is a picture of the overall big data investment in the UK over the last couple of years. So as many of you will be aware, the funding geometry in the UK is relatively simple. We have 7 research councils funding different disciplinary areas. It's far more complicated in the US, for example. And there are cross-council activities. Big data is one of them. The interesting thing about this picture isn't the detail, but it's really the axes. So you can see we have open data at the top and securely held data at the bottom. So an absolute recognition of the importance of securely held data. Equally, we have commercial on the left and research on the right. So an appreciation that this is not just in academia, not just in business, but cuts across between the two. Those flows are very significant in my particular area of social media analytics, where a lot of the tooling now is being generated in industry that's being reused in academia. The top right bit, the top middle bit there, the yellow thing that says social media data, is me. So my role for 20% of my time is an advisor to the Economic and Social Research Council on social media data and real-time analytics. And as you can see, that's very much a top right quadrant area to be in. Within my research council, Economic and Social Research Council, we have this big data network, and we've seen 2 rounds of investment, phase 1 and phase 2, in administrative data and in business and local government data. And we're now in phase 3, and we're currently in the phase of negotiating the budget for this area. You'll see one of the things in there is a social media data research centre and an international centre for social media research. We believe very strongly that social media isn't something that obeys geographical boundaries, and that the social science research that we want to do around social media and the benefits of that will come from working internationally. So that's one of the reasons I'm very happy to be here and having these discussions. And as I say, that's the phase that we're currently negotiating the funding for. Now, it's very easy when you've just seen admin data and business data and social media data to lump those things together. And you can look at social media as another new form of data, like admin, like tax records, like credit cards, like supermarket loyalty cards. And yes, that's true, and it's important. And so perhaps there are now more cost-effective ways of gaining a lens onto social behaviour through these new forms of data which are collected incidentally. It's a bit of a shift. Social scientists are used to conducting a survey to get the data they want, rather than collecting data from somewhere else, and you can question whether it's fit for purpose. And there are a whole load of methodological issues around that. So this is an important part of the agenda, and I think this is something that's quite well appreciated. It seems impossible these days to go to a conference or a workshop where someone isn't giving a paper about Twitter analytics, and you may have experienced this, and there are lots of questions we should ask about this and about the methodology and about calibration of that methodology against other methods and so on. But there are significant sort of benefits to establishing new methods that, for example, use social media for surveys. However, this isn't the thing that excites me most, and it isn't the reason I think social media deserves special attention. I think there are other aspects of social media which really are very, very relevant to our discussions today, and also warrant particular investment and particular study. And it's because you can do things you absolutely couldn't do before. The text on this slide comes from a UK government inquiry, a select committee inquiry involving ministers from the House of Commons into social media data and real-time analytics. So that was a group of ministers in the UK doing an inquiry into exactly that thing, which is very useful. It's put a spotlight onto that area, but it shows the importance of the area. So that's their phrase. Social media data offers the possibility of studying social processes as they unfold at the level of populations as an alternative to traditional surveys or interviews. And the other phrase we could put in there that is very important, and we've used a lot in these 2 days, is in real time, or in near real time. So the opportunity to study new social processes emerging at the scale of the population in real time, that's something very, very new and very, very important. I should demonstrate to you in a minute why that's important. The other phrase that gets used a lot to describe this is social media data as qualitative data on a quantitative scale, which is something that can generate quite a lot of discussion amongst social scientists, but it captures some of the issues again that have been discussed in these 2 days. It isn't, despite the Kelvin quote, I don't think it's all about the numbers. So something we can debate. So methodological change there. The report of that select committee inquiry came out relatively recently. It's called Responsible Use of Data. One of the things it focuses on is the complexity of the terms and conditions that are associated with using social media data. And one of the statements in the report is that terms and conditions on social media sites are more complex than Shakespeare, which is the soundbite that caught press attention and caused a certain amount of debate amongst Shakespeare scholars in Oxford. This is why I think new social processes are important. This is just one example. I'm sure you can think of many. This is a reference to the summer riots that occurred in the UK a couple of years ago. These were riots that occurred in the City of London and then in other cities. They were mediated by social media. That means it's not just another form of data. It's actually something that's an agent in new social process. Those riots have attracted a lot of study, a lot of Twitter analytics. One of those studies is called Reading the Riots. It was done by the Guardian newspaper and some work that was funded from my research council. And the pictures here demonstrate one of the parts of that analysis, which was looking at rumours. So something very, very interesting happened during these riots. Instead of the journalists going in and reporting to the citizens on what was going on, the citizens were going in, tweeting, and the journalists took on a different role, which was to challenge the reporting, work out what was real, what was true and what wasn't. So some of these things were not real. The London Zoo wasn't attacked and animals weren't released. The London Eye wasn't set on fire. It isn't flammable. You can then do the Twitter analytics and spot the behaviour in Twitter of what's a rumour and what isn't. And you know, this is a really interesting change in the role of the citizen and the role of the reporter and the role of the social media. So it's a good example, and it's a compelling example because it really is a new social process that's been enacted by citizens, and you can examine it in real time. So we've seen examples yesterday as well, in particular to do with disease outbreak, where that real-time opportunity gives you the chance to spot trouble before it happens, I think was a phrase that was used yesterday. Here's quite a different example, but I want to give this to illustrate something about the fourth quadrant in my earlier picture. And this is about the citizen engagement. And I could have chosen examples which were citizen sensing, collecting data, or citizen sort of sharing of data like Ushahidi. I've chosen a scientific example. So Zooniverse, some of you may have come across this, or perhaps its precursor, Galaxy Zoo, which is a big citizen science project. What's happening here is that astrophysicists are collecting data, which, you know, at this stage, it takes too long to really do the analysis by machine, but humans are better at it. Our cognitive apparatus is still better than computers. It would take one researcher a long time to do these things, but they crowdsourced it. So in Galaxy Zoo, 165,000 researchers, citizens were engaged in that process. That platform was refactored every few weeks. A new citizen science project is launched. There are now 1.2, probably getting on for 1.3 million citizens engaged in these projects. They've ranged from astrophysics to humanities to nature to climate change, and it's a really good example of not just big data being generated in the fourth quadrant, but big data being analysed in the fourth quadrant, and it's a good example of a new research methodology. So it's again an example of a shift that's occurring. What happens in Zooniverse is that there is a very crowdsourced piece, a data reduction piece, where people are using their eyes and their brains to do some analysis, like what kind of spiral galaxy is this, or what kind of animal is this that we've seen in the Serengeti, or how many penguins are there. That's the latest popular one. But actually what's happening is that those citizens are really engaging with parts of the science, and entirely new discoveries are occurring through the interactions on Talk Fora, discussion fora like social media associated with these projects. So in the Galaxy Zoo case, entirely new astrophysical objects were discovered. And really you're seeing not just crowdsourcing, but you're seeing citizen science. I've used this as an example of citizen engagement. You can think of many, many others. I wanted to choose a scientific one to sort of put the new research methodology on the table. Just in passing, I'd like to mention and reinforce something that Brian said yesterday about learning by doing. There's a sort of traditional view in social science, which is sometimes characterized as like the Star Trek prime directive. If you're a Star Trek fan, you may remember that when they go down to the planet's surface, they're not allowed to do anything that affects the independent sort of progress of the civilization. So you sort of stand back and you watch, but you mustn't intervene. And social scientists perhaps have been like that occasionally. That isn't the way we do things now. The Digital Economy Programme, which is a cross-council programme that was mentioned yesterday, has a very strong spirit of research in the wild. And the catchphrase we use within the funding councils for this is "in it, not on it." Right. So instead of standing at a distance and watching, you go in there, you do it with real people, you learn from that. The two things that are important are doing it for real and learning. If you don't learn, there wasn't any point. That's to reinforce the point that Brian made yesterday. Now for me, I've been involved in running a digital social research program across the UK for a few years, and actually social media is doing me a huge favour, because Twitter in particular, for all its problems, has caused a lot of attention. These new social processes that we can see in real time, the new computational social science that's building up around that to help us do that analysis. That is an example of embracing these big data issues, the volumes, the fact that we're getting data from new kinds of intermediaries which are sometimes monetized, different notions of ethics, not just ethics of process, but ethics of product and purpose, which we call responsible innovation. The new methodological challenges, working in and across these new forms of data, working in real time, interacting in real time, and being able to deliver the computational capacity to do that. The increasing automation in the processing of the data, but also the increasing automation that we have a lot more machine-to-machine communication. The whole process of research, how you record, curate, communicate that research, the notion of reproducible research, the notion of scientific integrity, the security issues, and underpinning all of this, last but very much not least, the skills and capacity to do those things. All of those things are highlighted by working in social media, but all of those things we need anyway for moving forward if we want to study our city, if we want to be building the knowledge infrastructure for the city. So Internet of Things is the next thing, I would say, along that timeline, next thing in the fourth quadrant. It has all those characteristics we have of social media. I'll say some more about the problems of this in a moment, but if you just scale forward in time, when we have billions of devices out there, think what that's going to do to the social science, and think what that's going to do to our city. There's a report published just before Christmas called "The Internet of Things: Making the Most of the Second Digital Revolution," which was a review done for the Prime Minister in the UK, which is a good thing to look at. Now I'm going to say a couple more things about cities, then I'm going to say a couple of things which are reflections on the discussions we've had so far. So something I commend you to look at is a range of sort of funding calls coming from my research council under the banner of urban transformations. We used to call it cities, we now call it urban transformations. Actually, it's interesting that we did the name change, and it was partly to distance ourselves from smart cities and future cities, which have become such strong brands in their own right. There's a scoping report which I was involved in, which you can find on the ESRC website, which goes through and describes what we mean by urban transformations. And these are the points in there. It's interesting to see what comes through. So the topics are innovation and technology, environment resilience, vulnerability, economies. Notice the cross-cutting areas: inequality, diversity, indifference, politics, contestation and governance, but then also the critical elements, of which the first is big data. And this goes back to my opening point. Big data and the citizen is about the citizen, but big data is critical to that. So that's a report that I would point people at, which describes in much more detail each of those headings. And it's interesting, it's a different set of headings to the ones we've been discussing over these 2 days, but I think it's fundamentally about cities, and big data is fundamental to it. Right, now I'll give you an idea, and then a reflection. Back in 1999, Tim Berners-Lee wrote a book called Weaving the Web, and in it he defined these things called social machines. A very common description of a social machine is the part of this quotation that's shown in green. Social machines on the web, processes in which the people do the creative work and the machine does the administration. This is a really important principle. It's saying, going back to the 4-quadrant diagram, it's saying that computers don't replace people, it's saying computers empower people. But I think much more importantly, and with excellent foresight, it's the next part of this quote that's very relevant to our discussion. The stage is set for an evolutionary growth of new social engines. The ability to create new forms of social process would be given to the world at large. So this is 1999. This is before Twitter, but what we've just seen, what we see now with Twitter, what we see with other social media, what we've seen with my example of the riots, for example, is absolutely about citizens being able to create new forms of social process. You don't have to fill out a form and register a Twitter hashtag as if it were a DNS address. Anyone can create one of those things. It's that empowerment piece which is significantly different. It's the new social processes which is significantly different. So that was well prophesized there, and social machines are being well studied. In the UK, we have a project called Sociam, looking at the theory and practice of social machines. It has something of an engineering emphasis, understanding how to build successful social machines more easily. I should say that when I normally present this slide, I identify those 2 points there as important, what I call principles of empowerment. I'm going to challenge my own word in a minute and tell you why that isn't empowerment. You all know social machines because you're interacting with them on an everyday basis. Wikipedia is a great example of something. You can see the behavior of Wikipedia is socially constituted. We didn't get requirements and a team of developers created something to those requirements. We see a system that's evolving, has different behaviors in different countries where there are different policies around redaction, for example. You're all part of social machines like the reCAPTCHA, where you're helping transcribe digital text at the same time as being tested to see whether you're a human or a robot. All these things, Zooniverse that we just saw as well, are examples of 4th quadrant social machines. What's really significant about the social machine idea is it's a different cut. I argue it's a paradigm shift on how we think of our socio-technical systems. So in computing, we tend to think of a layer of computers, and above that a layer of users, and a line in between which is called HCI or something. And social machines says cut that picture the other way. What you have is a set of users and the computers that they're using. That makes a social machine. And then you look at the ecosystem that we heard about yesterday from David Chan as a set of interacting social machines. It's that set of vertical constructions. It's not a load of technology used by a load of users. It's a set of interacting social machines. You're interacting in those ecosystems on an everyday basis. That's how the web looks. Investment at MIT on a new lab for social machines captures this very well. I mean, this is the text from their website, but I like the emphasis here on the last sentence, building social machines that bring system solutions to critical global challenges as gender equality, literacy learning. The Laboratory for Social Machines seeks to contribute to the creation of the next generation of the public sphere. So you can really see the social emphasis, and I think it's very easy when you talk about social machines to think machine, and my emphasis is very much to think social. What I'm trying to do here is turn around and think about the citizen. The Minister yesterday mentioned what's the impact of all this on academic research, and I wanted to show this picture. On the left is the big data elephant in the big data centre. It's very easy to think about that as a view of big data. Vendors quite like us to think of that view. The picture on the right is the one I'm advocating, which is that what we do in academia and beyond is actually create a sense-making network of people and machines. The humans are communicating, they're sharing things, but machines now are users too, they're readers and they're writers as well. So you have to think of it as this sort of computationally enabled sense-making network of expertise, of citizens, of data, of models. Narratives is something we could discuss a lot more. So that's my picture of how academia should look. A couple more responses to yesterday. There was a question about failure modes, and I gave a talk earlier in the year about this is actually being realigned by PowerPoint, but I was asked to give a talk about when IT goes wrong, and I talked about the world. If you take a social machines perspective and an Internet of Things perspective together, this becomes kind of dystopian, but I think we have to do this if we're talking about cities. And really, there isn't one thing that's the Internet of Things. We have to challenge the idea now that there's a closed system. People are moving between these social machines all the time. We have to remember that humans are creative and subversive, that not everything is human. With increasing automation, we have increasing emulation of humans, if you like. That some things happen by accidental assembly. With more time, I'll tell you the story about how my Christmas tree lights were befriended by someone by a bot on Twitter that had very interesting interactions. The high-speed finance, but high-speed research. Things are happening automatically through automation. Who's responsible when computers are doing the research? And there are other things on this slide that you can't see. But it's really a set of failure modes, and they're in three categories. One is things going wrong. One is things happening that you hadn't anticipated through accidental assembly. And the other is the malicious intervention that we have to consider as well. All of these things challenge assumptions that we tend to make. I've heard so many talks on Internet of Things that say we're going to have 9 million devices deployed in the environment and your homes and your bodies and the world will be a better place. I'm thinking, really? So there's some discussions to have around that. And my final slide, I like very much David Chan's slide yesterday. This is a photo looking at the behavioural sciences being translated into action. And I've just put on the right here my closing points that I wanted to leave open for questions and answers today, really, which is to shift that view. We've gone from a data-centric view. I've taken us through social machines to a much more citizen-centric view. But I want to say that using the word empowerment is still wrong, because that's what we do to the citizen. I want to go really citizen-centric and think we are the citizen. And what does it look like? And one of the things is that you interact with a digital city, not just a physical city, and we haven't talked so much about that. And where are the boundaries of that? And we talked a lot about sort of mobility of workforce, but that's a sort of geographical concept. What does it mean digitally? I don't know if anyone's looked at Estonia. This is a European country that is attracting digital citizens and digital businesses. It's a very interesting project to look at. They're changing their population digitally. Instead of saying where are the boundaries, I said whose are the boundaries, because this is about people. Right? We haven't discussed so much leisure, we haven't talked about gaming, we haven't talked about creativity, we haven't talked so much about cultural heritage. The reasons I highlight those are those for the citizen can be important in terms of value and identity. And those last words here, sense of value and identity, sense of fulfillment and purpose, is what I offer as an alternative to empowerment. Empowerment is what we do to citizens. Those are the things that citizens feel when they're empowered. And those are comments that the Minister made yesterday. So I think they're absolutely on message for our discussions. And I'll close there. Thank you very much.